I've been thinking a lot about just the concept of like compulsion, like something is good, something is nice, something is pleasant, something is
Loss of self
appealing in
through the
some
body and the emotions, yes?
yeah, yeah. And I'm curious about that because it seems like
Something that's a reverence issue.
it's a
The
reverence
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 curriculum. It's interesting, we're born as bodies and emotions and not much cognitive facility. People don't realize that there's even something called mind of other. There's a whole progression of our self-awareness. You ask a young child, and it's somewhat of an interesting scenario. There's a number of ways of presenting it, but it sort of works out to, if you're the young child and I say, okay, we take your toy and we put it in the drawer in the kitchen. Mm-hmm. I'm being more complex. I'm saying it in an adult way. Now you go outside to play, and I take your toy and put it in your room. When you come in, where will you think your toy is?
In the drawer in the kitchen.
That's an adult answer.
Okay.
The child will answer some, of course it won't be as complicated as a scenario. They do various ways of doing this. Will believe when you come in that you'll know it's in the room. Because your mind is my mind. When you go outside, it isn't possible that you don't know what's going on in here. You think you will. Mm-hmm. When you start to understand, it starts with object permanence. A little child, they see an object, you cover it up with a blanket, object gone. Mm-hmm. They don't see it doesn't exist. Mm-hmm. And then there starts to be more and more object permanence. Then you develop mind of other, all of these sort of things. All of these things are developed. You're not born with them. Mm-hmm. Those things, if you don't have them, I certainly don't think you can love in the same way.
Right. But
there's also a lot of aspects to the human dynamic that get trapped along the way. Freud, some people say, oh, Freud was terrible, blah, blah, blah. Freud was wonderful in what he did. He was a scientist. He, I believe, was a physiologist even, wanted to take this soft pseudoscience of psychology and make it into something much more rigorous, make it scientific. And he had all these stages of development. And we all now do these stages of development, stages of the development of mind of others, stages of psychosexual development, stages of moral decision making, all of these things. And we tie them to ages. And what we realize is that people often develop to a certain point and they don't develop any further. Why? There's no need. That if someone, for example, develops to a point where they discover the satiation, and then they're in a family where it's all about satiation. If you do this, you get the goodie. If you do that, and it's all about satiation. They have no need to develop beyond satiation. As a matter of fact, they perfect satiation. So you have these people in these different stages of what you would call moral development. And they are tied to their body and tied to their emotions in different ways. And their mind of other or their sense of self is still immersed in those things and confused with those things. So they think that their self is their performance. And if their performance is bad, their self feels somehow less and their whole experience of life dims. Yeah. So to be able to experience self beyond the body, self beyond the emotions, to be able to wake up with a stomach ache and not be upset or angry, to be able to experience incredible adversity, yet also feel intense love. These things are practices that are done in reverence. And what I hope, and what I've heard from some people in reverence, is they start to experience a sense of self, a different sense of self for the first time, often. Because they never had the opportunity. Yeah. They never had the need. As a matter of fact, it was disenforced by their environment.
Yeah, I remember different periods of time. I think the first time I ever experienced something like that, I had gone through a period of strict discipline. And then I was doing some emotional trainings that you had created. I think it was the characterization series. And I got out of the workshop and I was in the car and I felt like I was driving a different car. Like my experience of the whole space around me was different. And I looked at myself in the mirror and I felt like I was looking at a different face. And I saw like a freckle on my cheek that I had never noticed before. And I was like, what happened? Like it was this sort of objective perspective, I guess, of myself in my life that I had never had before. And I know the rigorous training I needed to go through in order to get myself to that point. So when you say it's a practice and it's a study and things like that, it makes sense because it also wanes. Like when I stop the practice, I know it's there, so it doesn't go away completely, but it's not how I experience the world all the time. So I think, I don't know. Sharing.
Well, it's an interesting thing. You wonder with human dynamic, is what you might call a state of awareness superior to another state of awareness? And we define a superior state of awareness where the person that has the superior state of awareness can do everything that someone without that superior state of awareness can do, and they can do more. So one of our objectives is to give people more options. It's never to close down their options of perception, their options of behavior. It's to open more avenues, but also to give them the tools to choose amongst those avenues. So, what my hope would be, some people say, oh, that sounds really terrible. What, she went through some sort of training. Was it a drug experience?
Yeah, no, it wasn't like...
or whatever. It has nothing to do with that. It's actually, it's very, very hard to describe.
Yeah.
But the hope is that you have more. You see things you've never seen before.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And I mean, that was exactly my experience, and it took me by surprise. But it's interesting because the rubber band snap is so fast. Do you know? It's like we forget how wonderful it is, and then we snap back to what it was before, which is subpar, but somehow...
But if you practice it, you come to a point, and we talk about that, we have all these, what we call Pavlovian links to your behavior. So you have your base state, and at times you get really, really happy, but you have all of these elastic bands that pull you back to being the way you were. Right. So a lot of people experience this. They'll have their normal life, then they'll get really, really happy, but then suddenly after a while they find themselves back again exactly as they were. And sometimes, when people are really happy one way or raise their base state, there is less jealousy, less anger, less hate, and certain things that you can even measure, see in their language. Are they vengeful? Do they need to talk negatively about people? All sorts of things like that. And they get to this state where they just feel so good, and suddenly they feel a sense of well-being for many people. People they've had arguments for a long time, they come to understand them. They can even do productive things with them. And then a month later, they fall back because we have these Pavlovian links that bring us back down. But what happens is the more we practice, the more, as we're in that higher base state, the more we form links there.
Right.
And it comes to a point where you practice enough that those links supplant the links that pulled it down. And now that becomes your standard. And if you go back to your old standard, it'll feel like you're sinking and you'll get pulled back up. So really, to increase your base state, it's not just increasing it once, there it is, now we have it. It is really fostering it and fostering your new life around it to bring that as a standard. So if you increase your joy, if you increase your kindness, if you increase your compassion, which are all measures of base state, you want that to stay. And you want that to become natural in your life. At first you do practices, you think, okay, I'm going to try to be kind. I'm going to try to extend myself to strangers and just for the sake of experiencing that. And after a while you find you smile at people more. You'll treat people more kindly. You'll do acts of kindness or community support that seem to be a natural extension of how you are, because now they are.
Right. Right. It's a training.
Yes. So you practice this.
Right. So I wrote, what's the nature of spiritual enlightenment? Can you explain it to me?
That's a very interesting thing. You know, to explain anything like that is to do it disservice. You know, I think that each person has, depending on what your beliefs are, even about the term enlightenment, different people have different journeys, and there's no enlightenment score. There's no measure. There's no, this person's more enlightened than that person. And it's more that people find their way to their personal completion, find their way to a higher base state, find their way to be able to embrace all of humanity, all of living things as them, and see those things within them without fear. So you might say that as you do these practices, you overcome fears, you remove bonds of suffering and replace them with joy. You come to have a relationship with human pain so that you have a deep conscience. Because when we have a conscience over something, it is marked by pain. And that pain is good. It is good to pain over either maladies, injustices, or tragedies. And that understanding, that experience, brings the joys of the world and the what you might call the brilliance of the world and the magnificence of the world, makes it so much more light. It's like that old sort of trite saying, God created darkness so we could better see the light. But existence isn't all about light and darkness. It's about something that encompasses both. People somehow think, unfortunately, in certain types of philosophies, that I want to be enlightened because I want to just not have to do anything. I want to be in harmony with the universe.
Right.
Sort of the lazy man's view of enlightenment. If you look of people who are the most enlightened that we've had, whether you consider Jesus that, or Buddha that, or any of the other, Gandhi, whatever, and they may not be in the same class to some people, other people they may be in the same class, none of them are slackers. None of them just sit and are in harmony. None of them have easy lives. Most of them have lives that make our lives, no matter how difficult they are, look pleasant and comfortable. Well, the truth of the matter is, when pain is no longer tied with suffering, and when we're no longer worried about having easy road, being harmonious, or things like that, when we cut ties to all of those judgments, which are what you might call part of our fearful ego, when those things go away, yeah, we do have more pain in our life, but no suffering. We do have more depth in meaning and tragedy in our lives because we're willing to embrace life in its fullness and accept tragedies as well as good things. You know, people take the happy path. This is what I call it. In other words, they're looking to just have make life happier and happier and have goodies, goodies, goodies. And that's an imbalance. You know, and if you study sometimes the ancient scriptures and all different things that have been written by religious people, there's so much wisdom in them. And in one ancient scripture, there's it's a story, and I apologize for not having it so literal, but essentially a man who's undergone many, many practices who becomes enlightened, so to speak. But he can't cross the final threshold to his final enlightenment because all he had accumulated what you would call good, sort of like good rewards. And all his life he had wanted a golden castle. And he had accumulated enough good actions to have that golden castle. So his positive balance sort of keeps him from enlightenment. So they take him to another dimension where he receives the golden castle and then can come back into his body to receive enlightenment. In other words, your desires that you earn the fulfillment of, can stand in the way because they're still attached to desires.
Right.
You know, it's looking at good and bad as aspects of existence, not saying, oh, I prefer good all the time over the bad.
Right.
So it is a type of acceptance that most people don't want to face. And when most people look at their life, they're looking for happy times.
Right.
And life is not really about that. So the meaningful life is the person who comes to the end of their life
Yeah.
and has deep tragedy and ecstatic happiness. So what were you going to say? I'm sorry.
No, I was about to sneeze.
No, that's okay.
I was reading the Bhagavad Gita, and in the Bhagavad Gita they talk a lot about, like, I don't know, I guess sort of for me, like, I feel like such a young student on this path. Like, it feels very new to me to explore my life outside the goodies and to understand the joy of existence separate from the pleasures of the body. And, you know, like, that's all newer in the last 10 years of my life, definitely.
Well, I'll ask you a quick question
Yeah.
and then
Go back,
forward. Most people, if they think of what their favorite movie is, truly, not just favorite entertaining movie, but truly what they think is a good movie.
Yeah.
You know, does it have just everything happen good? The protagonist wakes up and they win the lottery and they, you know, their house smells like potpourri and their relationship's great and their kids. It's not even funny. I mean, someone has to trip over something for it to be funny.
Right.
It's that existence is bland.
Yes.
The thing that makes it anything is the juxtaposition with tripping down the stairs or the deep tragedy. The most meaningful movies to many people have this elation but also deep tragedy. It's important in meaning. The meaning of life has both of those things. So to have your life, if you view your life as a type of a movie, as a passage of happenings, those things are in there in a type of balance that make it robust and full. And that's what allows us to feel more completely and love more completely and love more deeply. So, you know, do you want the movie of your life to just everything to go right? It's very, you feel not alive. It's numbing.
Right. Yeah. No, I guess, I mean, it's interesting as you're talking and sort of my questions being answered, because it was just saying in the book that, like, you know, there are students that are students in earnest, but they never actually get to a place where they have no attachment or they never actually reach transcendence. And I guess given the nature of where I feel I am right now in my own journey, I'm sort of like, God, I don't know if I'm going to get there. And
But you have to understand from, depending on what school or philosophy you come from, one of the classical views of enlightenment is to become enlightened, one has to remove one's desire for enlightenment.
right.
And that's the hardest of all. You know, you come to the doorstep of enlightenment and you're tempted with all the powers, all the riches of the world. And then the very final thing is you have to renounce enlightenment itself. Because the desire for enlightenment keeps you from enlightenment. So the student in earnest is actually more directed in a way that is pure, who does not expect enlightenment,
Right.
accepts that it well may not happen. It's irrelevant.
Right.
To the true seeker, enlightenment is irrelevant.
Right.
It's one's journey, it's one's conduct within the journey, it's one's capacity for compassion and love.
Right.
That's important. Otherwise, those things are rendered counterfeit. They're rendered inauthentic when one's actual goal is enlightenment.
Right.
Why are you doing these things? Well, I want to be enlightened.
Right.
That's not it. That's even disrespectful to the journey itself.
Right.
That's disrespectful to life itself.
Right.
Is it not good enough? Is your journey not entertaining enough? So you must be looking for the goal of enlightenment?
Yeah. So interesting. Okay.
So,
So, I said,
Did I answer your question?
Yeah.
Did you say what you wanted to say about the Bhagavad Gita?
yeah.
Okay.
I was just, I mean, yes, I had a confusion in there that you unconfused as you were talking.
Okay.
So, this is kind of an interesting question that relates to that. Is it seems like in life, like you meet kids, little kids, and they all have their own different nature, and it seems like some kids seem to care more than others. Some kids seem to be more intuitive than others. Some kids seem to be more conscious of humans than others. Why is that? Like, I think from a less loving perspective, I judge that as like a good and a bad thing. But it seems like it's a nature thing. Like some people just have that nature. And I just was wondering if you had any thoughts on why that is and where that comes from, or anything.
It could come from several places. My first answer to be with you is, why does it matter?
Yeah.
You deal with each child as the child is.
Right.
Your determination of why they're that way is not particularly helpful.
Right.
Now, it is helpful in as much as being able to help people evolve from wherever they are to a state that they find to be more uplifted. But, it could be genetics, it could be experience, it could be, who knows, all the metaphysical explanations of it. It's, in a sense, yes, it seems that is true. We don't know why, and to some degree it can switch around as an adult. You have a kid that seems very not self-aware, doesn't care about people very much, self-involved. 20 years later, you have someone that's some sort of deeply compassionate world leader. Different children have their brains that myelinate at different rates. When a part of the neurons, the functioning of the brain, if you will, it's not like all children are born and their brains are at the exact same state and they can do the exact same things at the exact same time. And it's not even in the exact same order. If you watch linguistic development, you can have some children that just are so far behind in language development. They can barely speak a word. Then the next month they're speaking in sentences.
Right.
So how these things fit together is by our science right now pretty unpredictable and pretty miraculous. But really what counts is where they are and what their next step is to help them go forward. And wherever they end up is the best that they can end up.
Right.
You don't want enlightenment for every child. That's one step worse than you wanting it for yourself.
It's like forced enlightenment.
Yes, exactly. I want you to be enlightened.
I had to dream about that. So I just was curious, what do you see as the greatest limitation between men and women in their quest to relate in a loving and compassionate way?
I could be a little smartass.
Yeah.
Well, the biggest limitation that women have is that they're women.
Yes.
And the biggest limitation that men have is that they're men. Now, that is, of course, not only an intentional wise ass oversimplification. Culturally, we form certain images about gender and about things like that in both men and women. And that, in some ways, lays the groundwork for the interaction. In some of the Jeunesse series, one of the ways I like to do this, because, I think sometimes I have. Every once in a while, I do have an insight. I don't know, it's valuable if it's useful for people, but one thing I do know, I go back to some of those really smart people in history and look at also things that are written, look at plays, look at commercials, look at all these things that surround us in media, and look at it like an archaeological dig. Let's find what forms our idea of what a woman is and what a man is by what is in the poems. What are the top people who, for example, call themselves, I hate to use the terms, but let's say a feminist or a liberated feminist. There's one in one of the Jeunesse tracks. I went and here I'm picking poems that are supposed to be representative to women about womanhood and to men about men. I can do the man thing because I'm a guy, but what right do I have to go and pick poems about women? That reminds me of this. There was a silly Saturday Night Live skit about, it was a parody on a show, and it's called The Woman Show, or All About Women. And it's a bunch of guys talking about women and talking about all these very sexist things. And that's what it's like. So here I go. So I look and I try to find out who are top, feminist or female representative authors. And then I found a woman that got together, like 30 of them, and they all picked, all these women who are authors, who are published and things like that, picked the top 5 poems that every woman should read that represent that. So I felt pretty good using their authority. Mm-hmm. And when you compare that to the male poems, it's striking. Mm-hmm. And it's striking what these poems educate us to do. Mm-hmm. And by looking at literature, looking at our culture, looking at this stuff that we all produce for each other, mm-hmm. what are these things saying? What are the messages that our children get in language, in video games, in TV shows, in movies, in anything? What are they, Even people with take the word hysteria. A lot of people don't know what the root of that is, and that's something that really slants against women.
Yeah.
I always say, it's hysterical. It's hysterical can now be funny. Hysterical, it's hysterical, hister this, hister that. It's all about the uterus, and all about things with it. But we have so many subtle poisons that make males a certain way as they go to men, mm-hmm. and females a certain way as they go to women. Mm-hmm. And to become aware of them is striking and startling. And both sexes, humiliating. Yeah. When men find out really how awful we are, it's humbling, it is scary, we don't know what to do. And when women find out similar things, their counterpart, and I've just heard from women, and I know you've gone through it, I hear that it's embarrassing. Yeah. You have top female authors saying things that are so much lock and key into the problem. Right. And what you come to realize with Jeunesse is the dance that we all do. And ideally, people start to divest themselves from that dance. Mm-hmm. But you have to see the dance before you can divest yourself from it. Mm-hmm. And I think it's many weeks of education in groups with men and women that come to trust each other and come to share very directly and look at these things and truly look at them. And my hope is that this study is a transformational process that will bring more and more people to see the different things, or some of the different things that are going on. Mm-hmm. And in bringing this ability to see to people, mm-hmm. the hope is that over time we will evolve beyond it, which I believe so. Mm-hmm. I had learned, like distinctions in language. Once you learn the distinction, like you learn the difference between good and well, mm-hmm. it's very hard to use them incorrectly again, or nauseous and nauseated. Mm-hmm. Someone says, I'm nauseous. Once you understand that distinction, it's very funny. Mm-hmm. To say I'm nauseous, if I'm saying I'm nauseous, it means I am making other people nauseated. The feeling of nausea is something that is very uncomfortable for us. And if we have that feeling, we are nauseated. Mm-hmm. If we are nauseous, we give other people that feeling. We induce nausea. Yeah, so, I'm nauseous. Everyone in the room feels nauseated. So it's sort of this funny thing. Now, are you going to be able, next time you go, as many people do, and say, I'm nauseous, say, no, nauseated. Yeah, totally. See, because you see it. Yeah. And the point is, when you have these distinctions, when you see it, and especially when you see it, not just because someone like me says so, or trainers say so, or the training says so, or the people in the training say so, so you have a group of men and a group of women, they're communicating with each other. Maybe it's just very isolated and not true. But when you see it time and time again in bestsellers, in major movies, and it's not once, not twice, but in an incredibly high percentage of everything you see, then you start to divest yourself more from the dance. And then it becomes more, because you realize it's prevalent. It's not just in your little group. It's not just in your little training. It's not just in some person's mind. That in fact, there is evidence.
It's incredible. Before I met you, somebody had asked me in an interview what I wanted to do in my career. Like, if I could do one thing, what would I do? And I said I wanted to change the way that young women thought and felt about themselves. And so when I came and I found out about Jeunesse, the curriculum for women that you had developed, I felt very relieved, because I felt like I knew what I didn't want to be, but I didn't know what to supplant that with. So it was like I had this opportunity to kind of be this for a period of time. When I was on television more regularly, like I had this opportunity to be sort of this example or this idea of something different, something new. But I didn't know like what that was. Like I was like, what is that? Like, and I think it feels like fumbly a little bit. That process still feels fumbly a little bit. And I was just wondering if you had any thoughts or ideas on what a more wise woman or a more evolved woman would look like, or is that a hot topic to ask?
No, and I can only approximate it. I believe that, and I have my own definitional basis of stages, going from boy to man to a leader man to a wise man, from girl to woman, and there are other stages, to centered woman to wise woman. But the ultimate state, ultimate experiential operating state that both males and females reach is one where they can see all of these things, and they also have a deep understanding and compassion for all people in all areas of them, and whatever stage they're at with it. They get it. And they have a deep moral sense of what their experience in life has brought them to understand as good and bad, the right, the morality of being human. So, and I wish there was some little book you could write that gives you all the ethical answers. But moral decision-making, moral questions, ethical questions don't have a single answer. And you can have people on multiple sides of an issue, and sometimes issues have multiple sides, that are all moral, humanist, compassionate, but from where their experience in life and where they come from, that is the authentic way they experience it. And there are many moral questions that really, it's not that there's an answer. It's not the answer to the question that's important. It's the contemplation of the question. And that contemplation brings us closer to being a deeper human. And this is not something that, for the longest time, there are things called Zen koans. They're questions. What's the sound of one hand clapping? If a tree falls in the woods, no one's there to experience it. Does it make a sound? All of these things. Do they have an answer? Well, you go many ways on some of them, but it's the contemplation that's important. Living an examined, contemplative life is what ethical humans are about. Way back when we were in the jungle, what we ultimately strove to be able to do was feed ourselves, have a family, and feed that family. And we're set. And that's important. People say, oh, well, world shouldn't be about having a family. Well, if none of us had a family, there'd be no future generation. So it is about procreation to some degree. Right. But that is no longer sufficient. It is no longer sufficient just to be able to support yourself, just to be able to have children, and just to be able to support those children and bring them up in some way. the world is too small for that, too many people on this planet. We need to consider other. We need to be able to consider other people, need to be able to consider other groups of people, and ultimately be called what I refer to as an ethical humanitarian. Someone who, maybe they don't have either the strength to act a certain way all the time or the other abilities, who knows what, but they have an eye to also what's good for humanity, what's good for understanding principles. Because principles are abstractions that transcend ourselves. There are abstractions that we make seemingly out of nothing, but they are principles that stand against our primitive nature, our in-the-moment impulses. And like I say with the cats, how many cats do you know that wake up in the morning and say, gee, what am I going to do today for the betterment of all cats? And I say this particular example because I sort of think cats are sort of arrogant, and sometimes they seem very contemplative, but I don't think there's a single cat that does that. And I also say maybe there are other animals that do, but I haven't met them so much. But humans have the ability to do that, certainly. And now, having the ability isn't enough. Because if we are to look at our human planet as a family, as an organism in itself, ecologically, compassionately, we can easily take many paths with that, and many of those paths lead to destruction. So we need to say, okay, it's not just about what feels good.
Right.
It's not just about what's comfortable. It's not just about what's good for us. It's about what's good for the whole. And the more wisdom is taking our life experience and bringing it to each decision. And the more of our life experience that we can bring to a decision, the better. So what does that involve? One, it means taking your life and experiencing it fully. Two, it means being able to access that fearlessly and bring it forth to the decision. And to mindfully do this, to do these as practices. And that allows you to be an ethical humanitarian. I don't know what everyone's morality is, but what's important is they act within their morality. Not amorally, not impulsively, not just by comfort or satiation. And when humans start to evolve beyond just becoming adults who can support themselves, have children, and support those children, and then you start to have civilization. And Albert Einstein, I believe, once said, civilization, great idea.
Yeah. So then a wise woman would be a woman who exemplifies that process, basically.
Yes, the wise woman would be aware of, if you will, her femaleness, her womanhood, what it is in society, what it is in her life, and that is not as important as being human. And what it means to be human and what is most important with humans.
Right.
And understanding, whether it's a wise woman or a wise man, where their wisdom comes from and the fallibility that they have in that our experience is limited. All right, so here I write this curriculum for women. I know well that I don't have the authority to speak to any woman, not a single woman, on many, many different issues. I could speak to them about human issues.
Right.
I could speak to them about my male observation of them as women. I could speak to them about what is in literature from the male perspective of women, and a whole bunch of things like that. But can I tell a woman what it is to be a woman? I don't have that authority at all.
I was thinking there's a push right now, just culturally, similar to like the creativity push. It feels like a lot of people are talking about, writing books about, and doing things, studies on this idea of like the need for more female strength in the world. We have like the elections happening with Hillary Clinton as being a candidate and all this, and everybody's like, women need to take more leadership roles and things like that. And I was just wondering like what your take was on that, given that your perspective is more humanist.
I'm going to give you a short thing.
Yeah.
You're using a lot of male language.
Right.
And male things to describe this, and that's disrespectful to women. Now, should women be in leadership roles? I think women are in certain types of leadership roles. Unfortunately, it is controlled a lot by men. Can women rise to be fuller in the world, in the principles that they experience, and bringing that wisdom, their unique upbringing, and even the cultural poison that they have to transform the world? Absolutely. They have to become aware of it, and they have to have that desire, and they have to struggle. It's going to be a big struggle. And it's a type of struggle because they have to struggle against a type of oppression, a type of box that they've been placed in by men, if you will. And, it's not just men now. It's men that were formed by literature, that were formed by men, that was formed by literature, that was formed by men, that was formed by the jungle.
Right.
It's sort of that. Yeah. And, men need to change in a different way. But both sexes have to become more self-aware and understand outside of gender, outside of sex, there's human.
Right.
And there are things that are transcendent as human.
It seems like that's true for any sort of movement. If you look at any group of people that are trying to get more empowered or trying to, overcome some sort of thwart or something like that, they get so stuck in their issue or their thing that they forget that.
Well, and there's also, I've seen some people say something that obviously I didn't come up with this. I thought I did, maybe, but who knows. I don't believe in equality. Equivalence maybe, but not equality. It would be awful to say that men or women are equal.
Right.
They're not. And sometimes I've had friends that were pretty, you might say, what are called radical feminists, almost as radical as I am. No, just teasing. But ask them, you ask them the following question, and it's a trap. It's a structural question. You have 100 male cats, and you have 100 female cats, and you want to stop the problem of overpopulation. And I say, something? Don't even sterilize the male cats. Sterilize all the female cats. You say it like that. They say, how dare you? Da 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 da. And then you point out it's a trap question. It's a structural question. You know why? Why should you sterilize all the female cats
Because
and ignore sterilizing the male cats?
the males can't reproduce without the females, and the males can produce many, 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 many cats, and the females can produce.
Right. In essence, I think a shorter way of saying what you're saying is that, you can sterilize. You have 100 female cats and 100 male cats. Sterilize 99 of the male cats. How many litters do you have?
100.
Of course. Now, 100 male cats, 100 female cats. Sterilize 99 of the female cats. How many litters do you have?
1.
That's it. Every female cat that you sterilize, you cut off the duct.
Right.
They're not equal. If they were equal, you could sterilize 50-50. You could sterilize that. They're not equal.
Right.
Structurally, they're not equal.
Right.
And it would be horrible in the world if we were equal. We would be so far behind. Men desperately need women, and women desperately need men. They need the differences.
Right.
The similarities are important, and the basis that they're both human. And it's interesting, you have even other difficulties because, you have sex and you have gender. So I've known 2 people in my life who were hermaphrodites. And sometimes they may not even know.
Right.
So the question is, all right, you have Jeunesse, and you have someone who was a hermaphrodite, and then they chose, if you will, the male sex organs over the female sex organs or whatever. Should they be allowed in Jeunesse? Well, I think it's more the answer of how were they brought up?
Right.
What was their identification? Did they have that? And it's not always clear. And it's really sad because all of these issues, because you have, we have these different gender issues, sex male, sex female. Then you have people there's a whole bunch of different types of things that are non-common variations. What's more important is that they're human. Don't forget that they're human. We can work out the other stuff. But people just get all trapped in that sort of a thing. So yeah, well, what's jeunesse about? Jeunesse is about people been brought up and identified themselves as a woman. If someone identified themselves as a man, even if they were a woman and they were treated that way, jeunesse may not even apply to them. We have another organization, SOP, that is for men. And then there might be some people that unfortunately don't fit in either camp. And you always have that when you have, you have people. I knew a woman in my high school, my public high school, who was albino, African American.
Wow.
She didn't fit anywhere. She was African American with white skin, And a lot of people experience that sort of a thing. The only way we're ever going to resolve those questions, because you're not going to have an absolute resolution like that, is be a humanist.
Right.
This is a human being you're dealing with,
Right.
more importantly than any of those descriptors.
Yeah, I guess that's just the toolbox you get to express yourself or experience yourself is the other features.
So do you have any other questions?
I mean, I feel like I could talk to you all night, but I think I covered all the questions on
Your list?
my list. Yeah, in different orders, but it's amazing. You went
Well,
through
good.
them all.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Well, you're welcome.